We're going to go into our tutorial section of the meeting, and we have Jennifer Malo with us. She comes to us from the School of Nursing at WVU. I can share your slides, or you can share them, whatever your preference is.
Go ahead and you share them, Tracy.
Okay.
Thanks. So I'm Jen Mallow. Like Tracy said, I'm from the WVU School of Nursing. I'm a PhD prepared nurse researcher, registered nurse, and nurse practitioner. So the focus of my work is the development and use of technology to improve access and outcomes in rural and underserved individuals. And today I'm going to talk to you about writing a solid methods section. Go ahead, next slide, Tracy. So I'm sorry if this tutorial is basic, and this is probably information that you've already learned in the past, but I find it really helpful to break the thinking away from the writing. So when beginning a project, whether it's a paper or publication or a grant submission or an abstract for submission, I start by having a solid methods section. So if you consider a research study as a delicate dish of knowledge, a paper's methods would be like a recipe that lists all the necessary ingredients of the study and how they need to be combined during the cooking. So ideally, it allows the dish to be prepared again with the same result. So the order of the writing process for me does not have to be the same as the eventual order of the article sections. And you might find writing the methods section easier to write than other sections of the project. So as the introduction and the discussion sections are often perceived as the most difficult ones, you might find it easier to start with the methods because the methods section ties the introduction to the results section to create a clear storyline. And it should present the obvious approach to answer the research question and then define the structure in which the results will be presented later. So if you begin your writing with the methods section, you'll provide yourself the structure to complete the project, the introduction section, and the discussion section of the paper. So today I'm going to focus on writing for publication, but these skills, again, can be transferred to any academic writing project. So the methods section of a paper presenting original research from a quantitative study has 4 basic elements: study design, setting and subjects, data collection, and data analysis. And it's quite common to use these subheadings as the structure of that setting or of that section. However, the target journal may offer specific guidance on how they want those titled. Also, in the case of human subject research, the authority providing ethical clearance, such as the IRB, needs to be stated here as well. Go ahead, next slide, Tracy. So before actually starting to write the paper, it's absolutely vital that the first author, as well as the main collaborators on the paper, have a clear and shared understanding of the primary research objective and key findings of this paper. Getting that author order up front before you start doing this is essential. And then deciding amongst authors what this paper is going to be about. This paper. Without this, it'll be impossible to write a clear and concise paper. So a paper is often one of many resulting from the same large research project. And there are always more to report from a project than possible within the word limit of a specific population. So each individual paper from a project has its own objective. And this allows you to decide what needs to be reported in this paper, what needs to be reported in another paper, or what you've already published and can refer to in your methods section. It's also important to choose a potential journal and target audience at an early stage so that you can format the paper to those specifications while writing instead of spending a day at the end of the process just formatting. Then you want to develop an outline with the basic elements of the methods section. And again, they're the study design, the settings and the subjects, the data collection, the data analysis, and your ethical board approval. If available, refer to a published protocol or a previously published paper from the same research project for an additional information about the methods. So this allows you to keep the methods section more concise. Be sure, however, to include all the information that the reader needs to understand how the key findings in this paper were derived. Mention the design of the present study, such as randomized controlled trial, prospective or retrospective, cohort studies, case controls, or cross-sectional surveys. And if you find it difficult to fit your study into a specific type of design, try to describe the key design components. For example, whether it was an interventional or an observational study, and whether the data were collected longitudinally or cross-sectionally, and explain when and where the study was conducted, how the sample was recruited or selected, and which inclusion or inclusion criteria were involved. Go ahead, next slide, Tracy. So mention the design of the present study, again, such as the, and these are just those designs that I had talked about on the previous slide. I probably should have had Tracy advance that for me sooner. Sorry, guys. Next slide, Tracy. Explain when and where the study was conducted. For example, the study was conducted within the West Virginia Clinical and Translational Science Institute Design Studio, and participants were in the state of the West Virginia in the spring of 2021. So you want to be as specific as possible. How the sample was recruited or collected, for example, a convenience volunteer. Was it systematic sampling? Was it random stratified? Was it matched random, balanced assignment, cluster, purposive, or snowball, or multi-stage sampling? Again, be very specific. Then again, which inclusion and exclusion criteria were applied? So the inclusion are the attributes of the subjects that are essential for their participation, and the exclusion criteria are the attributes of the subject that require removal from consideration for participation. And then provide a sample size calculation for studies that set up a statistically that specifically test a specific hypothesis. Next slide, Tracy. So data collection, define precisely what exposure, for example, was it a stressful life event, or what intervention, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy that you investigated, what outcomes you measured, for example, depression, and how you measured them. Was it self-reported? Was it a depression scale? And when the measurements were made, for example, during the screening visit, after a 12-month follow-up, and then cite original research on existing measurement tools that you used, and state if you designed a tool specifically for that study. Provide details on the measurement properties. Is it reproducible? Is it valid? Is it responsive? Is it reliable? And if there are crucial for the interpretation of the main results, you definitely want to report on those psychometric properties of the tools that you use. And a useful order to use in presenting your measurements is to start with the outcome measure or your dependent variable, followed by your exposure measure or the main independent variables, and then any possible covariates. Next slide, Tracy. So match the part on the data analysis with the research questions. So if you present a primary research question in your introduction and one or more secondary research questions, start by explaining the primary analysis followed by the secondary analysis. So provide sufficient detail on the statistical techniques that you used, and don't assume that your readers understand what you did from the name of the technique. So you have to describe that in detail. Be very clear about the definition and how you operationalized the dependent and main independent variables and the use of any covariance. So for example, if and how you adjusted your analysis. A lot of times we see this with depression scale. So that depression scale might be self-reported dichotomous as yes or no, or you might take a PHQ-9, which is a continuous variable. So you want to describe to people how you operationalized depression, what tool you used, and then how you use that in your analysis. And how you handle the missing, any missing data if it's there. Be honest and clear about your analysis and any intended a priori thoughts that you had to test your hypothesis, and if your analysis were exploratory. As there might be various ways to answer a research question, try to explain where necessary, why you made certain methodological choices, and why you think these were the best option given the context that you have. And then avoid putting the results in the methods section, such as the number of subjects that were recruited and followed up. And this is one of the most common mistakes I see in my novice writers in the PhD program. Next slide, Tracy, please. Okay, appropriate IRB review and approval should accompany all studies involving human participants or research material derived from human participants. And the manner in which the informed consent was obtained from study participants. In other words, was it given to you orally? Was it written? Did you do it online or electronic? And if the study was exempted from IRB approval, that information should be there as well. For, failure to provide this information in the manuscript will actually result in the manuscript being returned without review from the Journal of Appalachian Health, which is a journal of which I sit as an editor. So that's one of our criteria. All right, next slide. Thanks, Tracy. All right, so include basic information. This is just a wrap up before we have some questions. Include basic information on the study design, setting, subjects, data collection, data analysis, and ethical approval. I really like these sections because it allows me, it's like that cookbook recipe, right? If I get these pieces into it, then I'm able to expand that method section. And then refer to previous publications from the same large research project, such as a study protocol or for different information if applicable. And then consider providing detailed information on the methods as a web-only supplement materials. A lot of times in intervention studies, what you did was too involved to include in the publication itself, but people will be interested. So you can consider providing that as supplementary materials. And then at the end, ask yourself, would another researcher be able to reproduce the study with the information that I provided in this paper? All right, last slide, and any questions? Everyone's eating their lunch and has no questions, I can tell.
Just make a comment. That was excellent. Thank you so much. Really beautiful, beautifully communicated, and I'm sure we're recording this. I think it will prove valuable for people who aren't in attendance here right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I really like the writing by recipe style. It just removes that paralysis by analysis. Like if I begin with my introduction section, it feels like I'm stuck there forever. But if I begin with this method section, it's much easier to write the introduction, results, and discussion.
Real quick on including the IRB, you put the whole IRB number, West Virginia University IRB Board Review blah, 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 and put that all in. Yeah.
Yeah. It's sometimes when you send it in for peer review, especially if it's a grant application, you can include all of that information. Sometimes when you send it in for peer review, they want that information, like West Virginia University, IRB, they sometimes want it redacted for peer review. But yes, in the final publication, absolutely. And it's just 1 or 2 sentences.
Yeah.
All right, any more questions for Dr. Mallow? Okay, thank you so much again, both to Dr. Mallow and Raj and Paige and Dr. Shepherd, and everyone who gave us feedback today. I will be sending out the recap probably early next week, as well as the link to the YouTube recording. So thank you so much for joining and have a good weekend.